Number 12. Wang Shangkun. In 2011, a Chinese teenager named Wang Shangkun became so desperate for an iPad that he sold one of his kidneys on the black market to raise the funds necessary to buy the tablet. The decision came after he failed to come up with some other way to afford the device and remembered that someone had offered money for a kidney in a black market chat room. Shangkun received 22,000 yuan, which is equivalent to $3,078 for the organ, which he then used to purchase an iPhone 4 and an iPad 2. After undergoing the operation without telling his parents, the teen's mother noticed the expensive devices and became suspicious. She confronted her son, who confessed to giving up a kidney for the money to buy his new electronic goods. 9 people were reportedly implicated and criminally charged for their role in the organ-dealing scheme. Shangkun's seemingly desperate decision to sacrifice a vital body part for an electronic device made international news headlines. During at least one interview with local reporters in East China's Anhui province, he said that he didn't see why he needed 2 kidneys when the human body can function with just one. The young man's words came back to haunt him shortly after the illegal surgery, though, when he developed an infection resulting from the unsanitary procedure and the lack of proper aftercare, and soon enough his remaining kidney began to fail. In early 2019, news sources revealed that Shangkun was bedridden and undergoing routine dialysis to stave off imminent death. Curiously, there have been no updates on Shangkun's condition since then, leaving one to wonder if he's even still alive. Number 11. Stephanie Matto. Before she became a 90-Day Fiancé alum, Stephanie Matto was a famous YouTuber. She made her national TV debut in 2020 during Season 4 of the 90 Days spin-off Before the 90 Days, when she traveled to Australia to meet her then-girlfriend Erica Owens face-to-face. Throughout the season, Matto discussed her journey battling a rare autoimmune disease called aplastic anemia. Characterized by a low blood cell count resulting from bone marrow damage, the condition can put a patient's health in serious jeopardy, especially if they're exposed to pathogens. For this reason alone, it was dangerous for Matto to travel, but she was determined to see if she and Erica had the same chemistry in person that they shared long distance. But the relationship didn't work out, and by the end of the season, some viewers were left wondering if Matto participated in the series just to gain exposure for the sake of building up her brand and increasing her YouTube earnings. And her professional endeavors ever since then have only furthered this suspicion. Since leaving the series, Matto has written books, continued creating social media content, and has even founded her own adult content platform. As a self-proclaimed entrepreneur, there isn't much she wouldn't consider doing for money. This much became evident in December 2021, when she began selling fart-filled jars to her sizable male fan base. She reportedly made $50,000 in 1 week alone, and would later credit the niche product with helping to make her a millionaire. In early 2022, Matto had to suspend her farts in a jar enterprise after a health scare sent her to the emergency room with chest pains. Doctors determined that she was eating too many eggs and beans, which were the 2 main ingredients of the diet she was following to create maximum flatulence. She'd also been drinking protein shakes to help her keep up with the 50-jar per week demand. Luckily for Matto, though, her hiatus from the jarred fart market was short-lived. Later that year, she began advertising her goods again on social media, signifying her comeback after taking some time off to focus on her health. More recently, she appears to be focused on her adult content platform, Unfiltered, where she offers X-rated content to her subscribers. Number 10. Josiah Garcia. The website rentahitman.com was created in 2005 as a humorous advertisement for a cybersecurity company. It contains false reviews and a contact form for those interested in the company's services, and most internet users didn't need help realizing that it was all a parody. Much to the owner's surprise, however, a lot of people took the site seriously, and in the more than 18 years since the website went live, a surprising number of individuals have been arrested for contacting the administrator in an effort to hire an assassin. An unusual twist came in April 2023 when a US soldier from Tennessee was arrested for trying to apply for a job as a hitman through the website. According to the Department of Justice, 21-year-old Josiah Ernesto Garcia stumbled upon the site 2 months earlier during his search for a mercenary job in an effort to support his family. In the job application he submitted, he allegedly stated that he was interested in obtaining work as a hitman and that he wanted a high-paying job so he could support his kid on the way. He requested a more detailed job description and reportedly mentioned that he had military experience and rifle expertise. Over the next few days, Garcia exchanged several more messages with the website. According to federal prosecutors, he moved forward with the job application process by submitting his driver's license, a headshot, and even a resume boasting his credentials as an expert marksman. He allegedly reached out to the website 2 more times over the following weeks in hopes of getting to work as soon as possible. But by then, the site's owner, Bob Innes, had contacted the FBI. Acting on instructions from the agency, he continued to play along with the ruse until an undercover agent took over the communications. Posing as a representative from the website, the agent contacted Garcia for a phone interview and then set up a face-to-face meeting. During the meeting, Garcia allegedly accepted a $2,500 down payment in exchange for agreeing to kill a client's abusive husband. He believed that he would receive the $2,500 balance after completing the job. According to investigators, Garcia received a photo of the intended victim and asked the undercover agent if they needed photographic proof that he'd killed the target. He was arrested shortly thereafter and now faces a charge of using interstate facilities in the commission of murder for hire, and if convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison. Number 9. Caleb Rogers. Over a 4-month period starting in November 2021, a masked thief robbed 3 Las Vegas casinos at gunpoint, stealing a total of $160,000 cash. Footage from the first robbery at the Red Rock Casino Resort showed the suspect pulling into the parking garage during the early morning hours in a pickup truck covered in garbage bags. Then, in what would become known as his signature MO, he approached the cashier's cage and demanded money while keeping his hand in his pocket. The cashier handed over wads of cash totaling nearly $74,000, and the thief walked off with the proceeds. A few weeks later, the same suspect pulled into the Alianta Casino and Hotel in a white hatchback and parked in a handicapped space. He once again kept one hand in his pocket while demanding money from the cashier, who gave him $11,500 in cash. The serial thief was captured during his 3rd robbery at the Rio All-Suite Hotel and Casino, where he ambushed 2 cashiers at gunpoint after arriving in an unregistered minivan. One of the employees set off an emergency alarm, and security guards managed to tackle the suspect before he could make off with the nearly $79,000 in cash that he'd already placed in his bag. And responding officers were shocked to discover that the suspect was one of their own. 34-year-old Caleb Rogers was both a Las Vegas police officer and a heavy gambling addict who'd gotten in way over his head. Facing mounting debts and potential financial ruin, the 7-year veteran of the force resorted to casino heists, which are infamously difficult to pull off without getting caught. He had a department-issued revolver in his possession when he was caught and identified himself to arresting officers by providing his police ID number. During questioning, Rogers allegedly told interrogators that there was nothing anyone could have done to stop him from committing the robberies. Despite this admission, though, he fought the federal charges he faced for his crimes, which included 3 counts of interference with commerce by robbery and 1 count of brandishing a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. Rogers was found guilty as charged and was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay $85,000 in restitution, leaving him with far more problems than he started with when he made the unwise decision to try stealing the money he needed to climb out of the hole he dug himself into. Number 8. Ritual killings promise a windfall. In early 2022, 20-year-old Sofiat Kahindi set out from her family's home in Nigeria's Ogun State to visit her boyfriend, Soliu Majekadunmi, who lived just a few kilometers away. She was in the middle of cooking a meal when she left, and she didn't expect to be gone for very long, but she never returned home. The next morning, Sofiat's family awoke to news that a young woman had been beheaded in a nearby village. They then rushed to the police station, where their worst fear was confirmed. Sofiat was the murder victim, and she died in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable. According to police, the young woman was decapitated inside Majeka Dunmi's home, where he and 3 others lied in wait after luring Sofiat to the residence. A short while later, security workers noticed the suspects doing something suspicious behind a building and caught them roasting Sofiat's head in a pot with the rest of her body in a sack nearby. Soliu Majeka Dunmi had allegedly plotted the murder with Sofiat's ex-boyfriend, Balagun Mustaqim, and 2 other young men named Wariz Oladehindi and Abdul Ghaffar Lukman. But this wasn't a case of a bitter ex wanting to carry out jealous revenge. According to authorities, Sofiat's murder appeared to be the latest in a string of ritual killings being carried out by local youths who believed the murderous ceremonies would bring them good fortune. The suspects allegedly admitted that they'd identified Sofiat as a target months in advance before she began dating Majeka Dumni, and that the relationship was part of their plot to eventually lure her to her death. They reportedly told investigators that they researched the get-rich-quick ritual online, and they seemed to believe that they would become extravagantly wealthy as a result of their horrific deed. To get Sofiat to drop her guard, Majeka Dunmi said he engaged in intimacy with her right before one of her co-conspirators began slashing her with a cutlass. After catching word of what had happened, a mob of angry locals gathered and tried to carry out their own version of justice against the suspects. But law enforcement managed to stop them, and the accused killers were taken into custody to face the allegations against them in a more lawful manner. These types of ritual killings aren't unheard of in Nigeria, but Sofiat's death came amid an alarming spike in the number of ritualistic murders in the region. Most of the victims were young women, and many of the killers were young men hoping to score a quick fortune. The disturbing spate of killings came at a time when the illegal trade in human body parts for ritual use was also booming. Sofiat's family feared that justice would never be served in a traditional courtroom, and sadly, they may have been right. Within 3 months of the suspect's arrests, Waris Oladiende was deemed innocent and released from prison. 2 months after that, another suspect died behind bars, but the fates of the other 2 men remain unclear. Number 7. Richard Wilburn. On what began as a normal day in August 2003, a man wearing a wig, sunglasses, and an FBI jacket entered the Xerox Federal Credit Union in Webster, New York. He initially claimed he was there to perform a security check, but when it became clear that employees didn't believe him, he robbed the credit union at gunpoint. When 51-year-old Raymond Batzel refused the thief's orders to lie face down on the ground, the suspect began shooting. 2 people were struck by the gunfire, including Batzel, who died from a bullet to the neck, and another victim who survived a gunshot wound to the shoulder. The suspect left behind an extremely small DNA sample on an umbrella, but it failed to turn up any matches to known offenders. Years passed without any viable leads turning up, so eventually the case went cold. In 2016, 12 years after the shooting, the FBI posted billboards encouraging members of the public to come forward with information. A tipster pointed them in the direction of a former Xerox employee named Richard Wilburn, who'd been fired for chronic absenteeism before the shooting. Wilburn had unsuccessfully sued the company for racial discrimination and had also reported a former landlord to the FBI for allegedly wrongfully evicting him. After being let go from the company, the disgruntled former employee faced a world of financial problems, including mounting bills that he had no way to pay. Yet he managed to fly under the radar until the FBI's renewed effort to solve the case generated the tip that helped them identify Wilburn as the shooter. In an effort to covertly obtain a DNA sample from Wilburn, FBI agents invited him to their office and asked him to act as an informant in an unrelated case. He agreed, and the agents asked him to fill out some paperwork and put it into an envelope. The ruse worked, and the saliva sample Wilburn left behind on the envelope turned up as a match to the elusive armed robber who'd managed to hide in plain sight for over a decade. In 2020, a federal jury found Wilburn guilty of the robbery homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison, but continued to maintain his innocence and appealed his case from behind bars, arguing that the DNA sample on the umbrella and the testing methods that were used to identify it were unreliable. But an appellate court upheld Wilburn's conviction in late 2022, so he remains behind bars. Number 6. Doris DD Moore. 40-year-old Abraham Shakespeare was a man of modest means, but his life changed dramatically in 2006 when he won a $30 million jackpot in the Florida State Lottery during his lunch break at work. He chose to receive a one-time payout, which came to $17 million after taxes, and he spent nearly his entire fortune within 2 years. From the moment the money fell into Shakespeare's hands, it seemed like the people in his life wanted to get their paws on it at any cost. The co-worker who was with him when he bought the winning ticket sued him, claiming that Shakespeare had stolen the lottery tickets out of his wallet. Shakespeare refused to give his co-worker a cut of the payout, and the court ruled in his favor. In the meantime, Shakespeare moved out of the poor neighborhood where he grew up in Lakeland, Florida, and bought a house in a gated community. The only other major purchases he made were a Rolex and a Nissan Altima, yet his money was disappearing left and right as he caved to pressure to help out fair-weather friends and strangers alike. And at some point, the constant nagging for money became so overwhelming that Shakespeare began to wonder if he would have been better off without his fortune. He felt used, and rightfully so, but he likely never imagined that running into a windfall would put his life in danger the way it eventually did. In November 2009, after not hearing from Shakespeare in 7 months, his family reported him missing. They'd initially assumed that he left the area to escape from the endless barrage of opportunists looking to piggyback off his lottery winnings. But as time dragged on, they became increasingly fearful that something terrible had happened to him. Investigators soon discovered that in the months before Shakespeare went radio silent, ownership of his home had been transferred to a company owned by a friend of the missing man named Doris DD Moore. Records further showed that Moore had transferred $1 million of Shakespeare's money into her name. Then, about a month before Shakespeare was last seen, Moore used some of the funds to buy a Hummer and a Chevy Corvette. Moore had an array of excuses for why she was in possession of Shakespeare's money. During one interview, she told detectives that he didn't want to pay child support. And in the month after the missing persons report was filed, she sold the Hummer to a dealership for quick cash. Meanwhile, Shakespeare's mother received an email claiming to be from her son, stating that he was okay, but Shakespeare was illiterate and his family knew that he hadn't typed the message himself. Around the same time, a man claiming to be Shakespeare called his mother, but she could tell it wasn't her son's voice. In early 2010, Moore offered to pay a man named Gregory Smith $50,000 to take the rap for Shakespeare's death. Smith agreed to take the blame in exchange for the location of Shakespeare's body and proceeded to tip off the police. An undercover agent got involved and tagged along to a meeting between Smith and Moore, during which Moore took them to a concrete slab behind her house that she claimed Shakespeare was buried under. She also handed over the gun that was supposedly used to kill Shakespeare. And sure enough, Shakespeare's body was found beneath the concrete slab. Moore's ex-husband, James Moore, told detectives he dug and filled the hole months earlier at Moore's request. But he claimed that he never saw what was in the hole because it was dark out. DD Moore maintained her innocence throughout her trial, while accusing at least 5 other people of killing Shakespeare, including drug dealers, a friend of the murdered man, an undercover police officer, and even her own teenage son. But the jury didn't buy any of her stories, and she was convicted of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic sentence of life without parole in Florida. In 2023, after having her conviction upheld following 2 previous appeals, Moore filed a motion seeking a new trial. The 50-year-old accused her previous attorney of failing to present key evidence, including DNA and testimony from Shakespeare's ex-girlfriend. For now, she appears to be awaiting a final answer from the court on whether the motion will be granted. Number 5. Brandon Council. In August 2017, an armed thief entered a Crestcom bank branch in Conway, North Carolina, and demanded money. But before fleeing the scene with roughly $15,300 in cash, he fatally shot the bank's manager, 36-year-old Katie Skeen, and a 59-year-old teller named Donna Major. Horrifying footage of the crime showed the killer approaching one of the women at a desk and shooting her multiple times at point-blank range. He found the other victim trying to hide under a desk and repeatedly pumped bullets into her until she too was dead. Later identified as 32-year-old Brandon Council, the suspect fled the scene in Skeen's car. Investigators traced his movements to a nearby hotel, where surveillance cameras captured footage of him pulling up to the building in the stolen vehicle. Council then retrieved some luggage from inside the hotel before fleeing the scene. Security footage from before the deadly robbery showed Council being dropped off at the hotel by the driver of a minivan. Detectives traced the vehicle to a woman from Wilson, North Carolina, named Melissa Taylor Fogg, who allegedly admitted that she saw Council stomping on his cell phone outside the hotel in an attempt to destroy it. Shortly before the robbery, Council was captured on video leaving the hotel in the outfit he was seen wearing during the crime. Long story short, there was no doubt that he'd committed the double murder, while taking very amateurish steps to cover his tracks. 3 days after the robbery, authorities tracked the suspect down at a hotel in Greenville, North Carolina. Council attempted to run, but he was taken into custody after a brief foot chase. According to court documents, he confessed to the deadly bank robbery. He also allegedly admitted that he knew ahead of time that he was going to shoot someone, and that he committed the crime because he was desperate for money. During the conversation, Council reportedly told FBI agents that he was inspired to commit the robbery after watching a movie called Get Rich or Die Trying. He also made a remark about how he didn't deserve to live, and made several disturbing statements about possibly being possessed by demons. At the time, Council was the prime suspect in at least 2 other bank robberies. The alleged string of thefts began just days after his probation for a previous larceny charge ended. And in 2019, a federal jury convicted Council of bank robbery resulting in death and using a gun to carry out a crime resulting in death. As a result, he was sentenced to death. In the aftermath of the case, questions were raised regarding Council's mental competency and the possibility of racial discrimination by the court, but his conviction nevertheless stands as he awaits execution at a federal penitentiary in Indiana. Number 4. Aldrich Ames. While working as a CIA agent during the mid-1980s, Aldrich Ames became increasingly burned out and jaded by his career. From the outside looking in, the Wisconsin native was hardly the type to turn on his own country. After beginning his career as a low-level clerk in 1962, he'd risen through the ranks to become one of the top-ranking counterintelligence officers of the agency's Soviet division. But Ames was disillusioned with the ongoing Cold War drama between the US and the USSR, and he was growing increasingly desperate for money. The support payments to his ex-wife weighed heavily on his pocketbook, and his second wife was a heavy spender. Long story short, Ames was strapped for cash, and he was willing to go to extremes to alleviate his financial suffering. One afternoon in 1985, he met with a KGB official for lunch in Washington, D.C., and during the meal, he offered up a cache of documents containing findings on some of America's most valued sources of Soviet insider information. The rest was history. Ames received $50,000 for the documents, and with the help of his wife Rosario, he began spying for the Soviet Union on a regular basis. And during his first 4 years as a double agent, he made nearly $2 million. Ames dropped classified documents off at pre-arranged locations, where they were picked up later on by KGB agents. This was also how he picked up his instructions and payments from his Russian handlers. If Ames needed to meet with his handlers, he would make a chalk mark on a specific postal box. During the early 90s, FBI and CIA officials realized that the top Soviet officials who fed them information were being executed at an alarming rate. Suspecting the presence of a mole within the American intelligence community, the agencies launched an investigation. Their focus turned toward Ames after he began showing signs of unexplained wealth. At the time, Ames was making $60,000 per year, yet he owned a house in Arlington, Virginia, worth over $500,000, which he paid for in cash. He'd spent upwards of $99,000 remodeling the home, owned a $50,000 Jaguar, and had several credit cards with minimum payments that outweighed his monthly income. Ames had also started wearing suits that even his superiors couldn't afford, and it became evident that he'd undergone expensive cosmetic dental work to repair his smoke-stained teeth. For nearly a year, beginning in 1993, investigators kept a close eye on Ames as they continued looking into his past activities. Surveillance recordings, tracking data, and a search of his home yielded more than enough evidence to prove his unauthorized interactions with Russian intelligence officials. And in early 1994, Aldrich and Rosario Ames were arrested by the FBI. As part of a plea deal, Rosario received a 5-year prison sentence for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit espionage. Ames pleaded guilty to a more serious espionage charge and was sentenced to life in prison. As a contingency of his plea agreement, he was required to help the CIA uncover the impacts of his crimes. Several Soviet spies had been executed as a direct result of information that Ames had shared with the KGB, but the full extent of the damage he caused may never be known. The 82-year-old is currently serving out his sentence at a federal prison in Indiana, where he'll remain until his dying day. Number 3. Desperate groom fraudulently funds wedding. After an evening out with friends in Port Dickson, Malaysia in April 2021, a 25-year-old data analyst called the police and reported his Subaru Forester stolen. He claimed that he'd parked the vehicle just an hour earlier before having dinner and that it was nowhere to be seen when he returned to the parking lot. The details of the man's story didn't add up though, and suspecting that he knew more than he was letting on, detectives continued to investigate the matter. The findings indicated that the man had falsely reported the car stolen in order to collect the insurance money. Under heightened pressure from investigators, he admitted that he'd hidden the car behind a nearby supermarket. He told police that he was due to be married soon, but that he couldn't afford his wedding. In a desperate attempt to finance the event, he tried to fake the car's theft so he could collect the insurance payout. With bigger problems on his hands in the form of criminal charges, he now faced the prospect of having no wedding at all. It's unclear whether the couple ended up exchanging their vows, but it's likely safe to assume that the man's fiancée would have rather had a simple wedding than a husband facing a host of legal problems and the embarrassment that came with the news of his arrest. Number 2. Wayne Jones. As a steel worker with a 6-figure salary and no criminal record, 49-year-old Wayne Jones was not the typical robbery suspect. But push came to shove in 2015 when a gambling addiction and an ongoing divorce wiped out his finances, leaving him deeply in debt and facing imminent foreclosure on his home due to the $8,000 in back taxes that he owed. By then, Jones had 3 past bankruptcies on record, and despite earning a decent income, his money problems always seemed to catch up with him, which is unfortunately what tends to happen when someone becomes a habitual gambler. Desperate to stave off his latest bout of impending financial ruin, Jones drove to the Motor City Casino in Detroit one morning and carjacked 2 elderly women at gunpoint in the parking garage. He ordered the victims into their car, got into the back seat, and instructed the woman behind the wheel to start driving. During the drive, Jones forced the women to hand over the contents of their purses, which amounted to just $31 in cash. He also took their cell phones, credit cards, checkbooks, house keys, and other personal belongings. After dropping the victims off at a dark, isolated location, Jones took off in the car. In the meantime, the victims started walking. A few miles down the road, they ran into a Good Samaritan who took them to a nearby police station. Jones was identified as the suspect through his casino player card activity. He was also seen on surveillance footage retrieving his own vehicle from the parking garage shortly after the carjacking. Authorities arrested Jones at his workplace and charged him with 2 counts each of carjacking, armed robbery, unlawful imprisonment, and felony firearm. Following his arrest, he immediately expressed remorse for his actions and the life-ruining consequences that he knew lie ahead. Jones ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 felony charges, including carjacking using a firearm in the commission of a felony and 2 counts of unlawful imprisonment. 3 felonies were dropped, and he was sentenced to a minimum of 13 years behind bars. Records show that he'll be released sometime between September 2028 and September 2037. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. Number 1. Scott Michael Green. Police in Urbandale and Des Moines, Iowa were well acquainted with a troubled loner named Scott Michael Green, who had a lengthy history of menacing and erratic, but mostly non-violent behavior. However, the 46-year-old behaviors escalated in unexpected ways during the fall of 2016, leading to a crime spree that ended in multiple needless tragedies. It's unclear when and where Green's ultimate downward spiral began. In late October of that year, his mother was arrested for allegedly striking him in the face during an argument that was reportedly captured on camera. At the time, Green was unemployed and living in his mother's basement. But after the arrest, Patricia Green decided that she wanted her son out of her house. A few days later, she applied for an order of protection from her son, telling the judge that she believed Green had set her up to get her in trouble. Patricia further claimed that when she was in jail following her arrest, Green contacted her through a friend, saying that he would peacefully go away if his mother paid him $20,000. She also accused her son of sending her a slew of harassing and threatening text messages, which reflected the prolonged mental, emotional, and financial abuse that Green had allegedly put her through. The judge granted Patricia a permanent order of protection in early November and ordered Green to move out of his mother's house within 4 days. She also instructed Green to refrain from taking any of Patricia's assets and to return the $10,000 that he was accused of taking from her. No amount of desperation can explain what happened next, but the court ruling seemed to trigger Green's dark side in the worst imaginable ways. Just hours after the hearing, he gunned down a 38-year-old Des Moines police sergeant called Anthony Bamino as he sat in his patrol car. Then, just minutes later and about 2 miles from the first crime scene, Green fatally shot 24-year-old Urbandale police officer Justin Martin, who was also sitting in his patrol car. Green initially pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, but he changed his plea to guilty during a court hearing in May 2017 and asked to be sentenced immediately. The judge complied, sentencing him to 2 life terms. During a news conference after the hearing, Polk County prosecutor John Sarconi speculated that Green was simply a cop hater who eventually decided to act on his anti-law enforcement sentiments. Notes, drawings, and a hit list found in Green's jail cell seem to support this theory. It will likely never be known whether Green's financial situation or the court order to move out of his mother's house were factors in his decision to open fire on the 2 innocent cops who lost their lives that night. The good news is that society is now safe from Green, and he no longer has to worry about his housing situation or living expenses. Number 10. Joran the Murderer. In 2010, Dutch national Joran Andreas Petrus van der Sloot killed Stephanie Flores Ramirez while in Lima, Peru. He's also suspected of murdering Natalie Holloway back in 2005 in Aruba. He allegedly committed these murders exactly 5 years to the day apart. The killings gained national news not only because of their terrible nature, but also because Joran was a rich kid who thought he could travel around the world and get away with murder. Luckily for all the other young women out there, Joran didn't get away with anything. He tried to flee to Chile, but the police captured him and brought him back to Peru for questioning. Then on January 13, 2012, the judge gave him 28 years in a Peruvian prison. But let's go back to 2005 in Aruba. Technically, Joran got away with the first one since the courts never proved that he killed Natalie Holloway. Police arrested him under suspicion of murder after she vanished, but they released him after 3 days. One reason he got away with it is that, according to Aruba's chief prosecutors, his father, a filthy rich man with some serious connections, intervened in the investigation. We don't know the exact specifics of what happened, but his rich father bailed his son out, got him out of the country, and made the whole thing go away. If he hadn't struck again, Joran would have gone unpunished for making Natalie Holloway vanish forever. Number 9. Affluenza teen. Ethan Couch was a rich teenager in 2013 when court sentenced him to 10 years of probation for a drunk driving accident. The accident, entirely his fault, killed 4 people and injured 2 others. Prosecutors in the case originally wanted him to spend 20 years in prison. But because Ethan was rich, he received no jail time. And I'm being 100% honest when I say the reason he didn't go to jail was that he was rich. A psychologist testified in court that Ethan was a victim of affluenza. He was the byproduct of a wealthy family who had never given him limits, had let him do whatever he wanted, and had instilled a sense of entitlement in him. Because a psychologist said he was not responsible for his actions because of having rich parents, they let him off the hook for getting drunk and killing 4 people. Now here's where things get crazy. In 2015, Ethan violated the terms of his probation. His crazy mother, Tonya, snuck him across the border into Mexico. Mexican authorities found the pair and shipped them back to the US, and a judge in Texas gave him 2 years of jail time. He didn't go to jail for murder, for plowing through 4 pedestrians and killing them, but he got 2 years for leaving the country. Texas courts released Ethan in April 2018, and he is still on probation. Number 8. Rich kids and a hitman. In 2021, a hitman murdered a law graduate in Pakistan. He murdered her at the behest of 2 psychotic rich kids who got angry after they begged her to get intimate with them, and she refused. Authorities say these rich kids, who showed off their lavish lifestyle all over Instagram, pestered the woman to get physical with them. And after she refused, police discovered her lying in a pool of her own blood. Her name was Myra Zulfikar, 26 years old when the hitman shot her in the neck. The suspects involved in the case, Saad Butt and Zahir Jadoon, recruited a professional contract killer after she refused their advances. Authorities launched a nationwide manhunt for the 2 men, and they apprehended Saad, but the other suspect remains at large. So too does the hitman, who has yet to be identified. Myra, who had been studying in the UK, had travelled to Lahore 2 months prior for a wedding. She stayed for a little while, and that was when 2 young rich kids lured her into the local party scene. The children of rich politicians and business tycoons suddenly surrounded her. Parties filled with drugs and guns and open violence were common for these spoiled rich kids. Before the hitman murdered her, she tried to reach out to the local police, but they did nothing to help her because these rich kids were well connected. Prosecutors have not charged or given any kind of punishment to anyone involved. Number 7. Lamborghini crash. Court sentenced a teenage boy, the son of a businessman worth millions of dollars, to 9 months in a juvenile camp in October 2021. The teen is so young that his name has not been released to the public. He was behind the wheel of a Lamborghini when it slammed into a car, killing a woman in West Los Angeles. The deceased is Monique Munoz, and her killer was 17-year-old at the time of the incident. He admitted in juvenile court to vehicular manslaughter. And while the public urged the judge to impose the maximum punishment, that's not what happened. Maybe because the teen was remorseful, or maybe because his daddy was rich and connected to politicians. The judge gave him an extremely light sentence. A brief time at a juvenile camp, basically a summer camp for teenage criminals, and he'll be right back out on the streets. The hardcore facts here are that the teen was behind the wheel of a Lamborghini, a car no teenager should probably drive, and he was going 100 miles an hour, 160 kilometers per hour, when he committed vehicular murder. Number 6. The Affluent Murderer. Prosecutors accused a filthy rich teen in Los Angeles of murder in 2017, yet the courts allowed him to stay home from school while awaiting trial. School officials were forced to kick Cameron Terrell off of his high school campus following a letter from parents demanding the school remove him. This was after police arrested the 18-year-old for driving the getaway car involved in the deadly shooting of Justin Holmes. Police charged Cameron with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. And to be fair, there was no doubt that he was involved in the terrible crime. Yet the courts released him after his parents posted his $5 million bail. The reason the other parents wanted him out of school was that they thought it was a safety risk for their kids. Being a known murderer doesn't exactly make you the most popular guy at school. And so, after his involvement in a gang killing, Cameron could hang out at home and take his classes privately. And as if this didn't outrage you already, when it came to his trial, the jury acquitted Cameron of the whole thing. He beat murder charges when he was the getaway driver of the shooting, and he's currently free and enjoying his rich lifestyle. Number 5. Drunken Ruckus. Authorities arrested Peter Brandt Jr., one of the rich kids of Instagram, and a guy who is the son of a billionaire by the name of Peter Brandt at the JFK airport. It happened in 2016 when the 22-year-old socialite, richer than any of us can ever dream of being, caused a drunken ruckus. He was with supermodel Stephanie Seymour when they got arrested by the Port Authority as the couple was waiting in the JetBlue terminal. They were there to catch a flight to West Palm Beach, but clearly Peter had been drinking way too much. He became belligerent, got into a fight with one of the staff, and then assaulted a police officer who came to investigate. The rich socialite was so drunk, he had to be taken to Jamaica Hospital, where doctors treated him for severe intoxication. But of course, there were no real charges filed against the rich kid, and he didn't get in any trouble. Number 4. The Backseat Driver. Police arrested a stinking rich kid in May 2021 for driving in the back seat of a Tesla. He's become known as the Backseat Tesla Driver, spotted on video cruising in with his bare feet propped up on the center console from the back seat. And no, there was absolutely nobody behind the wheel. His name is Param Sharma, and you may have heard of him before. He's in his 20s, he's Instagram famous, and he's a bit of a show-off. His arrest came when calls started pouring into the California Highway Patrol from concerned drivers who witnessed a vehicle traveling along the I-80 interstate with nobody in the driver's seat. Then, when the cops pulled up to the vehicle, they witnessed Param scramble from the back into the front to play it off, as if he had been driving the whole time. They arrested him on suspicion of reckless driving, along with disobeying a peace officer. They towed away his Tesla. But don't worry, he bought himself another one. The day after the incident, he did the same thing again, sitting in the back seat while his Tesla drove him around. He even bragged about it on the internet, saying, "I already got a new Tesla. I'm rich like that." Number 3. Rich kid robberies in Central Park. In 2010, Jesse Wasserman went on a bizarre crime spree in Central Park, earning himself the name Boarding School Bandit. He was 17, a wealthy teen wannabe gangster from the suburbs who went on a string of robberies using a fake rubber gun. Jesse wandered through Central Park at night, pretending to be lost. When he stopped people and asked for directions, he then pulled out a fake gun while his accomplice stole their cash and valuables. According to one victim, he was riding his bicycle through the park at about 11:35 p.m. 2 guys approached him and asked for directions. Jesse pulled out the fake gun, told him to drop his bike and hand over the money. Instead, the guy dropped his bike and ran away. But this was only one victim. Jesse and his friend robbed another guy of his wallet and cell phone. They robbed somebody else of their backpack and jewelry. And he went on robbing people until the cops finally caught him at 1 a.m. in Greenwich Village. Police charged Jesse with robbery and then released him on a $150,000 bail, and he got away with no serious repercussions. He was a rich kid from New York, pretending to be a thug from Harlem, a dropout of the elite Virginia Academy. And even though they let him go, the judge said that if he gets arrested again, he's looking at 25 years in jail. Number 2. Stabbing his friend. Yusef Mackey was killed in Manchester in 2019, stabbed to death by his wealthy friend, Joshua Molnar. Joshua was so rich that even though he plunged a knife into the heart of his friend, the courts cleared him of all manslaughter and murder charges. They ruled the killing as not accidental, but also not unlawful. It all went down on March the 2nd when the Manchester Grammar School pupils got into an argument in the evening. They had met up with a third friend, Adam Chowdhury, and gone to buy some pot. Something went wrong at the deal, and 2 of the drug dealer's associates beat Joshua. While he was being beaten, the other 2 young men watched and did nothing. Then, in the evening, after things had settled down, things heated up again. They got into an argument over what had happened, with Joshua saying his friends were cowards for not helping him. During the arguing, Yusef pulled out a knife, Joshua also pulled out his knife, and then Joshua stabbed his friend. The knife penetrated his heart and caused fatal injuries. If you ask pretty much anyone, this seems like a straightforward case of murder. A jury refused to convict the rich kid, and so he got off scot-free. Well, mostly free. The jury cleared him of murder, but jailed him for 16 months for the crime of possessing a knife in a public place. Number 1. The rich kid of Instagram. Instagram rich kid Stephanie Scalaro avoided jail even though she admitted to importing roughly $20,000 of endangered snakeskin fashion accessories into the United Kingdom. This is a bizarre crime that only the richest of the rich could think about attempting. And believe me when I say Stephanie is as rich as it gets. The pictures of her wearing very little clothing in exotic locations have hundreds of thousands of followers. She is the daughter of Francesco Scalaro, the Italian mining tycoon. She has homes in Monaco, New York, Ibiza, and London. Her bizarre arrest came when authorities stopped a package from Indonesia in Germany. The package was filled with bags and other fashion accessories made from illegal skins. This was in March 2017. All the packages were bound for Stephanie's house, and so the police in London went and arrested her. But surprise, surprise, Stephanie didn't get in much trouble. Her fancy lawyers argued that Indonesian snake farmers had scammed her. She ended up admitting to 2 counts of illegally importing goods. Courts gave Stephanie a sentence of 12 months of community service and ordered her to complete 160 hours of unpaid work. If you were offered a large sum of money to portray yourself in the most unflattering way possible on a reality TV show by exaggerating all your worst personality traits, would you do it? Or would you forgo the big bucks for the sake of sparing your reputation? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.